As an architect, I believe that we should think of people as if places mattered. That space must, over time, show the potential that people will appropriate it for themselves and attach meaning to it and utilize it in different ways, sometimes in ways that you can't even imagine. But if that works out, that is really one of the true rewards of architecture. Behind me is Bloemfontein. Here lives more than 500,000 people who all have big dreams. For some, it might be owning a small home or obtaining an education. For others, to have many properties and to live a charmed life. We have been involved across the whole spectrum of these extremes which manifest in the nature of places.
Architect and urban planner Anton Roeth has won numerous professional awards over the course of his career, many for his contribution to the built heritage of Bloemfontein, the city in which he has spent most of his life. His involvement in heritage matters spans 4 decades, first as a student and then lecturer at the Department of Architecture at the University of the Free State, and later as principal of Roeth Architects, a firm founded by his late father in 1952.
If we talk about places, we know that places get imbued with associated meanings. Very much like the statue of Nelson Mandela here on Naval Hill. And all South Africans are attracted to come and visit the statue, and in that sense, the statue has the ability to transform society in the sense that people have the same feelings, the same associations with the late Mr. Mandela. But it's not like that with all places. And the ability of architecture to transform places, especially in our society, should not be underestimated.
One of the places transformed by architecture and imbued with meaning is the National Women's Memorial and War Museum. The memorial was erected shortly after the Anglo-Boer South African War of 1899 to 1902 to commemorate the women and children who had died in the conflict, especially in the concentration camps. Roeth Architects recently completed a wall of remembrance at the memorial to commemorate both black and white women and children who had died. This forms part of a larger program to transform the museum into a more universal symbol of the suffering of women and children, rather than being something specific to the Anglo-Boer South African War.
Now, Emily Haberhaus was closely associated with the Women's Memorial, and she was invited to deliver the inauguration address, but only got about halfway. I think at Beaufort West she had to turn back due to ill health, and her speech was read in her stead. But in her speech she clearly indicated that this memorial should not only be for one part of the South African society, but should really be symbolic of the whole society. And that part of her speech was not reported in the papers of the day.
There are about 34,000 names on the walls, despite the fact that records of many of the names have been lost. An historical conservation area that has not been lost is Bloemfontein's President Brand Street, one of South Africa's grandest boulevards. The street was created in the late 19th century.
There was a land surveyor, Gustav Baumann, who had this vision of making President Brand Street a boulevard of note. So he specifically noted in his memoirs that he made the street 30 meters wide. And he tried to persuade the town council to buy the property at the southern end of the street so that something substantial could be erected there. You know, in much like the in classical planning where you have these axes and so on, and vistas and views and so on. As it happens, he couldn't persuade the town council. Nonetheless, the street is there, and without any real long-term vision, the various institutional buildings over the next 50 years or so were erected along this street. You know, the City Hall, for instance, was supposed to be somewhere else at Hofman Square and so on, and it would have been clad in white marble, but on number 99 it was moved to President Brand Street and things like that. So it's maybe a collection of happy accidents that the street is what it is today.
Ruet Architects has been involved with the rehabilitation, restoration and maintenance of a number of buildings in President Brand Street, including the Presidency. The design of the building resulted from an international competition for architects, which was won by a Queenstown-based firm, Lennox Canning and Goad.
The parsimonious Volksraad, of course, looked at these plans and decided that they were all too beautiful and really too ostentatious for the Free State, and most important, they were too expensive. So they just voted a ridiculously low sum, and poor Lennox Canning had to adjust and cut away and pare down and so on to try and get this house. The program remained intact, but all the so-called aesthetic elements and so on had to go. We have an image of the competition entry, and if you look at the building as it's realized, you can see it's vastly different.
Ruet Architects, then headed by Anton Ruet's late father Leon, completed the first restoration of the Presidency in 1985. They were approached once again in the early 2000s to restore the building after extensive water damage.
We decided to replace the raised roof section over the building in order to deal with the internal gutters and so on that were necessitated by the lower roof. And in that sense, the building resembled what it looked like by the end of the 19th century. We also did some work on the garden and replaced some of the stone elements and zinc decorations that were there. Also, some painting was done internally. We discovered painted friezes and dados and so on, and which also became evident on photographs that we then repainted. And of course we don't know what the colors were, but to give an idea of what those spaces looked like at the time, the decorative elements were suggested.
Ruet was also involved with the restoration of the old government buildings, which currently house the National Afrikaans Literature Museum. These were comprehensively rebuilt and added to after a devastating fire in 1908.
Not a particularly attractive building, but it had a fairly long and interesting history. It was added to It was substantially expanded by the government architect J.E. Wixerboxer. And then Herbert Baker appeared on the scene, and they added a section, especially to the west side of the building. The courtyard of the building is the large courtyard, retains many of the Baker elements, and that was the area of our main intervention in the building, was to add some archive rooms and so on.
Arguably the crowning glory of the Republican period in terms of architecture was the Fourth Raadsaal or Legislative Building, which was completed in 1893 during the presidency of F.W. Rates.
The design was probably favored because of the fact that people like him favored the American democratic model, which was of course based on the ideas of the French. So the architecture then, the Raadsaal building resembles these capital type buildings that are dotted all over the American landscape. It differed in the sense that it had a large area, it has a large area for the public, about 500 seats, whereas in typical colonial parliament buildings, the locals are really excluded from attending sessions and so on. When, during the Anglo-Boer South African War of 1899 to 1902, the British moved into Bloemfontein, the soldiers. The Raadsaal was occupied and used as a hospital and so on. And after the war, when colonial rule was established, it was once again used as a legislative for functions relating to that. And one of the first items on order was to remove the carved Free State coat of arms on the pediment of the west facade. And Hamilton Gould Adams, who was the Lieutenant Governor, consulted his good friend Herbert Baker on how this could be best achieved. Baker immediately wrote back with some sketches saying that it's a very attractive, as he called it, attractive little building, and that they should rather put the British coat of arms over the main entrance and retain the existing coat of arms, as it might spoil the building if they tried to remove it. Now it's this sort of magnanimous way of looking at things that is a good lesson for us even in our contemporary society, with the debate raging at the moment on statues and so on. When in the 1950s the Free State Provincial Administration asked the relevant minister then, who was C.R. Swart, if the building could be proclaimed a national monument, and he said no, fine, but they must remove the British coat of arms above the front door, which they did, and it was replaced in the mid-90s, I think, with a fiberglass model. So these things of removing and putting back, and the meanings associated with places always remain contentious.
One of RIT Architects' most important projects was the erection of the regional offices of the Department of Public Works on the last vacant lot in President Brand Street.
The client wished to have a building that would relate to the context of the street. President Brand Street is in a conservation area, in fact the first conservation area in South Africa. And so the street is well known for its collection of sandstone buildings, quite often in conjunction with red tiled roofs and red face brick. So we utilized the stone and face brick, but here in a contemporary way. The stone is really a curtain wall veneer, and then the red face brick, obviously that is typical of the Free State. And yes, we feel that the building sits quite comfortably in the street. We've also arranged the design in such a way that the offices on the street facades are lower to correspond to the massing of the other buildings in the street, whilst the rest of the accommodation is pushed back in the center of the building, which then rises up in the middle, but is not that visible on street level, as you can see. If President Brand Street is in a sense a street waiting to be rediscovered, we can talk about the township of Wauwek as a place waiting to be remembered.
In 1904, the town of Bloemfontein suffered a devastating flood which destroyed large parts of the city.
So it was decided immediately that a radical new plan must be put into place, and the engineer Piet was tasked to do this, and he designed a 800-meter long channel with 6 sandstone bridges across. The sides of the channel is laid out with packed sandstone. The sandstone was acquired from quarries that were situated in close proximity to the Wauwek township. And as the local authority needed more stone, they just expropriated more houses. The flood of 1904 started the gradual raising of Wauwek. As the location was really right at the very edge of the town, and in those days it was only a street that separated the white and the black community from each other, and the town council felt that this should be changed. Now, today what remains is akin to what the journalist Nathan Trantral calls post-apocalyptic or an alternate South Africa. It is really the direct opposite of what we found in President Brand Street. And the local municipality, as well as National Treasury, have embarked on an ambitious regeneration program of this area. So in a sense, we're aiming at getting historical closure. So the people that were removed to Batu, we would like them to return by means of inserting housing on a large scale, so that people can be closer to their place of work, and also historically there is some restitution. Remarkably, the building behind us is the only building surviving from the Wauwek township. The building is the Wesleyan school building, in which the ANC was founded in 1912. The building was much altered. For many years it served as a dry cleaning concern, and then it was purchased and converted back to what it was as a school. The new building is a visitor center. that will house an exhibition explaining and exhibiting the development of the ANC. And further behind us, the cooling towers are built on a portion of Waihoek, and the township stretched back for about 3 kilometers, but was gradually raised, and then by 1941 the last people were moved to the Batu township. The larger project will focus on a wider urban scale, which include inter alia a new bridge that would link the eastern hinterland with the CBD, introducing housing on a massive scale, creating an urban park, and really linking some of the historical buildings such as the Wesleyan School with the old fort, which is situated in close proximity, and to revitalize that area of the city by capitalizing on the public transport that is represented in that area by the railroad and railway station, the new intermodal transport facility that deals with taxis, as well as a large bus terminus. This is one of those projects that would require us to think about a place in a different way, and also rather than working on a lot of existing historical buildings, we must now work within a space that that is in essence empty, and you have to reimagine a new place that would on the one hand celebrate the history of Waihoek, but on the other hand deal with the challenges of a contemporary urban setting.
Ruud recently realized his lifelong ambition of designing his own home, which is sited on the edge of Naval Hill, overlooking the city in which he has dreamt most of his big dreams.
Some time ago, I was asked to describe my dream house, and after reflecting on this idea, I realized that it is not so much the house that is important, but actually it's the dream. Because it doesn't matter how big the house is, or how well appointed it is, or how lavishly it's furnished, or so on. But rather, if it is a place where the dreams of being happy and living a fulfilling life can play itself out, that is the important thing.
En ons bou en ons breek deur 'n argitek se pen en 'n bouer se sweet en ons land. Ja, haar skouers is breed, op papier 'n figuur, nou geboue wat preek. En wat preek dit? Wat sê dit als? Met die een word geveg, met die ander gewals. Vir somme sê jy las, vir die ander maar. Een word geabba en die ander gedra. Soos die tyd ook en tik, word nog geboks, getik, op nog geplot, drop nog gebriek. Baksteen op baksteen, tot op die tonne vandag, wat op die land steen. Cement, die sentiment, en stap op het met jou hakskeen. Sommige sien is nat deur die venster, ander hoor het op die dak reën. En som voel die warm, of as sterk winde waai. Andere word deur 'n aircon verraai. En som kan nie kies, tussen batte verstort. Ander is tevrede, maar net 'n dak oor die kop. En almal is intelligent.